Welcome back to the Junkyard Dawgcast, everybody. I'm Jake Rowe with Dogs 24/7. With me, Kip Adams and Rusty Mansell. Also of Dogs 24/7, it's game week. Georgia Clemson game week is here. All right, this is like Christmas for me. Ready to get the season started. Ready for some real football. I always kind of hold myself out of watching all of the kind of the lead up football. That way, just the real stuff hits harder, guys. The real stuff gets you better. And that's what I've kind of done. And I know you guys have I know Rusty's watched a lot of football. I'm sure Kip has too. He's a big Falcons fan. He's probably been all over the preseason thus far. So there's a lot to talk about because Kirby Smart spoke with the media day, as did JT Daniels for the first time since SEC Media Days. We also spoke to John FitzPatrick, got a little news there, and Nakobe Dean. And guys, let's get into this Kirby Smart press conference. I'm going to give my take on it a little later on. But, Rusty, I'm going to throw it to you first. You've seen the press conference. You've seen kind of what came out of it. Nothing super earth-shattering, but a takeaway. We got three of us. Let's do three takeaways. What's your takeaway?
I think the first one is JT Daniels. I mean, you look at him, and this is a guy that's been here now for a full year. The continuity he's had with the guys in the offseason. I think, him talking about the culture of football in the South. He talked about landing at the airport, driving into Athens for the first time, which is crazy. This guy never even took a visit to Georgia before he signed with Georgia. But he talked about driving into Athens. He talked about, seeing G's and flags and billboards coming in. And he said he kind of knew at that point that this was different. Football here was different. He said he's always been that way. It's been he's been programmed, or just the way he's wired is that football is such a big deal to him. So I think just looking at him and listening to his comments and what he said today about, yes, there were some injuries at wide receiver, but, guys got to step up. This team's been recruited. This 85-man roster is deep. It just means that some guys that haven't got a chance to play yet have got to step up. And, really just talking about some key things, I think, talking about facing SEC defensive lines, the pressure you see in the SEC. He knows this Clemson defensive line's elite. He talked about getting the ball out of his hands on time. And, it's not just coach speak kind of thing. I mean, that's what he's talking about are legit things and things that he's learned over the last year and a half since being in Athens, being a Georgia Bulldog, starting some games and coming into such a national game this week with Clemson. So, I really just think that that's the right things you want to hear from a experienced guy, your quarterback. I've said it before, this is the guy that the team's got to believe in. 10 other guys in the huddle have to think that JT Daniels is our guy. You earn that respect through practices and camps and off-season workouts, and it's certainly very clear that JT Daniel is the leader of this football team, and we're going to find out where he is Saturday night.
I thought it was interesting, Rusty, how Kirby was like, hey, I don't have any concerns about JT. I don't have any concerns about JT's preparation. I don't have any concerns about how he's going to handle this or he's going to handle that. And, listen, this could be just a head coach that is trying to take some pressure off of his quarterback. But I don't know. There's been a lot of if you read Kirby's comments all summer long, anytime we've gotten a chance to talk to him since the spring, even during the spring, there just seems to be a lot of confidence in that kid. And then when you speak to him and you see him speak, you kind of understand why. I mean, he had one of the most – and listen, this is not going to cause him to throw for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns and lead Georgia to a win over Clemson, okay? But as a person, had one of the most impressive comments that I've heard when he was asked about how he battles his nerves. He said that he just acknowledges what nerves are, and that's basically your body's response to something meaning a lot to you. And to me, I was like, that's a really mature way to go about it. If you're looking at the mental side of things, JT Daniels should be fine. And, he has been fine. He has been really good since that first week or so of spring practice or preseason practice and that first scrimmage. But a lot of confidence from Georgia's players and Kirby Smart in JT Daniels, his preparation and the way he handles things mentally. Kip, what was your takeaway? I know Georgia got a commitment right there at the end of the Kirby thing, so you haven't had a chance to maybe dive into this as deeply. But what was a takeaway for you after that press conference?
Kind of just reading what you had kind of reported earlier in the morning that, tight end John FitzPatrick, all signs were leading to him being back and ready to go. And, last week, the whole narrative, and it seemed like just everyone's discussion was about just how banged up Georgia was and how here we are game week. And it seems like Georgia's kind of getting healthier, and getting guys back, not just Fitzpatrick, but also it looks like Kearis Jackson's going to be able to play. But really with Fitzpatrick, with, that position and how important we discussed how important that position was going to be in this game, getting a guy that you can depend on in Fitzpatrick, a guy who has experience, who is basically a returning starter from last season, I think that's just huge for Georgia because Fitzpatrick, it's, we talked about Darnell Washington. We talked about that position, the guys that they're bringing in, extremely talented. Fitzpatrick's a really, really good football player. He can do a little bit of everything, as far as that edge blocking. I mean, that's going to be a key factor in this game is how Georgia's front can really handle Clemson's defensive front. I mean, that's the strength of their football team. So having a guy like Fitzpatrick in there that you can line up and kind of help you out there on the edge, that's got to help, really make Todd Monk and the whole coaching staff feel better. And again, he's a guy who can help you out there in the passing game as well. And really someone who's going to help JT Daniels. Those calls are coming in for the sideline. He's a guy that can really help him make sure everyone's lined up correctly and make sure that they're calling the right play. He really can help every single facet of the offense. So getting him out there, I mean, that's just a huge addition for Georgia's offense. And really JT Daniels' confidence, that's something that I think is going to be really important in early stages of this game. Such a huge matchup, everyone's watching. Having someone you can depend on in John FitzPatrick, I think, is just a big bonus for this team, this offense. Just overall, their chances of coming out strong early in this football game.
Rusty had brought up the idea of Georgia putting a tight end number on another offensive lineman, and there's no doubt they'll probably still do that. I mean, that's something that they did, whether they needed to last year or not, or last couple years or not, whether there were injuries or not, right? But having Fitzpatrick there, having a 6'7", 250-pound guy who, as JT Daniels mentioned, he fixes things up front. I mean, that's something you normally hear about a quarterback, but John FitzPatrick fixes things. He helps get things lined up correctly. Sometimes things don't come in exactly like they're supposed to from the sideline. He's a guy that can kind of correct those issues, but you also got to cover him. Rusty, you didn't have to cover Amarius Mims if they put number 41 on him and ran him out there. You don't have to really cover that guy, maybe in the goal line, but you got to cover John FitzPatrick. And listen, he's not Darnell Washington after the catch. He's not Eric Gilbert before or after the catch, but he showed last year he can make a big play or two if you need it. And that double threat right there, to me, is a big deal. And actually maybe even changes the way I look at this game a little bit, knowing that hearing his comments and him say, and let's get into this too, John FitzPatrick basically said, listen, I was banged up, but I still practiced throughout preseason. And to me, that's a big deal because there's a lot of zero gravity stuff that Georgia can do to help these guys stay in shape. And there's the bike and there's all that stuff. But that hand-to-hand combat and that football shape is a little tougher to get into. And Rusty, just knowing that he was able to stay engaged and continue to practice throughout the preseason, I think should make Georgia fans feel a lot better.
Yeah, and you talk about, you can imagine what Fitzpatrick was thinking. Eric Gilbert, you start hearing him talking of Eric Gilbert coming, and you already got Darnell Washington, you got Brock Bowers, and you're sitting there thinking, man, this room's about to get really, really crowded. Even though Eric Gilbert, was playing wide receiver, there were some talks of moving him back and forth between some rooms. So regardless, you got to start thinking. But it's one of those things where you just say, hey, look, you never know how this thing's going to play out. You never know how this thing's going to play out over the next 2 months, over the summer, into the season. And all of a sudden, John FitzPatrick's sitting here after the Monday of Clemson week, and he's the number one topic. He's the number one discussion of what Georgia fans want to know. Is John FitzPatrick playing this week? I mean, here's a guy that, nobody's really talking about in June. We don't even get a question about him on the board. And now we get 2 weeks into August, and everything happens, and all these injuries happen. And every day, Jake, you're getting is FitzPatrick back. So
We need John FitzPatrick.
John FitzPatrick's got to be here. You know what I mean? So you go back and look at all these things and how quickly things can change, and what a blessing it is to have someone, number one, of his size, number two, with his experience, number three, physicality, and a kid that can catch the ball. Is he an athletic freak? Is he a Kittle? No, he's not. But he can catch the ball. He can hurt you with his size, and certainly can be an inline blocker. So in the Georgia offense, that's a big deal to get him back. I think Brock Bowers is a guy that we all three, whoever we talk to, all agree that he's going to be a really good football player. But, man, it's asking a lot of him to go into Clemson and be the one and only kind of dog, be the guy. So I think Brock Bowers probably feels a little bit better too, knowing that somebody like FitzPatrick's there. I know JT Daniels made comments about him. He's glad he's there. So, it's one of those things, man, how quickly things can change. The mood of the Georgia fan base, the move of our message board, the Junkyard Dawgs 247. When you came in this morning and said FitzPatrick's back, I mean, hell, you might as well just have said that Georgia signed a 5-star tight end that's eligible this week, because it made fans happy. And I know that that Georgia coaching staff is excited to have him back.
Yeah, and one thing I'll point to as well, you look back at that Arkansas game, and I'm not sure if it was Georgia's first touchdown, if it was the second. It was one of those. Arkansas tries to throw the umbrella out, I believe, in like a third down or a second down and goals type situation. I believe there was like 6-7 yards, maybe 9, whatever. They tried to throw the umbrella out. They wanted to max out a zone and maybe force Stetson Bennett into a mistake. But John FitzPatrick, a third-year player at the time, now a fourth-year player, knew where to go, settled right into the zone. They threw it to him. He made one turn, dove into the end zone, touchdown. That kind of play, Josh Pate and I did this podcast, a couple 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we talked about those types of plays, those 3rd and 6s, those 2nd and 8s, those goal line or goal to go situations. They're huge. And John FitzPatrick's the kind of player that he's played enough football. Listen, Rusty, Kip, nor myself, okay, are going to go create an NCAA football 2021, okay, and put John FitzPatrick as a 98 rated tight end, okay? He's not. He's a good player. But more than anything, he's what Georgia. He's with Darnell Washington and Eric Gilbert not in the fold. He's what Georgia needs. Georgia does not need all three of those guys missing right now, and having John FitzPatrick's there, John FitzPatrick in the fold is huge. I know folks are probably tired of hearing us say his name over and over again, because I feel like I've said it 20 times in the past 5 seconds. But it's a big deal, and I think it's a big deal for Georgia's run game more than anything, because I just feel like. You look back at that Ohio State game last year and how Trey Sermon really had some success against Clemson. I don't expect Georgia to go out there and rush for 250, 300 yards against Clemson, but Georgia's going to be tough to beat if they rush for 175. They're going to be really tough to beat. Rush for 200 is going to be really tough to beat. So, you start looking at that type of things, and that stuff becomes more feasible with John FitzPatrick in the fold and able to play. I'm going to go a little bit different on this, because it just, not necessarily that it means anything as far as this game, but it kind of threw me for a loop a little bit, guys. Kirby more than once talked about the idea that, hey, listen, this game, he knows going into it, and he understands that people are going to make this game a measuring stick. They're going to base a lot of this 2021 season on what Georgia does in game 1. But at the end of the day, Georgia's got 11 more games to go. And I know personally, something I reported this morning, I'm not putting my season predictions out just yet, because I don't know how I'm going to pick this first game. My Monday lean right now is Georgia, but I got Georgia going 11-0 in the next 11. So, I mean, all the goals are still on the table after that. And that's something I think everybody listening to this podcast, everybody that reads our work needs to understand is, this is a measuring stick. This is a top 5 matchup. This is huge. Georgia's taking a young football team in some areas and an experienced football team in some areas into the season. But it's not the end-all, be-all, and you've still got 11/12 of a regular season to go after this, and Georgia's going to be favored in every game after that. So I just thought it was interesting that came up in the Clemson Media Day press conference with Kirby Smart, and I thought it was interesting how he was like, listen, I know how you guys are going to treat it, but every game's a measuring stick to him, and when that game's over, they're going to focus on UAB. But this is a game that I fear for us, because we're going to have to deal with it, that people are going to put way too much into it. Sure, it's a huge game if you win it, and it sucks if you lose it. But Kip, at the end of the day, if you don't win it, we're not canceling the season.
No, we're not. And they still have every goal, attainable for them if they don't win that game. But we've also said this before. If they don't win that game, then the path to achieving their goal is clear. You got to win in Atlanta, and then that's it. So, we can put out our season predictions. It could have Georgia getting to Atlanta, and it probably will across the board. But it's what happens in Atlanta that matters, and you have no margin for error if you lose this game to Clemson. I mean, you're still giving it, putting it in other people's hands if you don't take care of business in Atlanta. But if you go in there 12-0 and play a close game, it's still, you're going to be tough unless there are three other conference champions that just run the table. It's going to be tough for them not to put Georgia in the playoff if they go in and lose, a close game to Alabama, LSU, Texas A&M, whoever comes out of the West and plays in Atlanta. So, Kirby's right. Their goal is obviously to win this game, but they know if they come out of this game 0-1, that they still can do everything they want to do this season. But now you have to run the table. You got to win 12 games in a row at that point. And not many teams do that. It doesn't happen a lot at all. Everyone talks, Alabama obviously set the standard. They don't do that. They rarely run the table as well, so Kirby's right. And you have, that you could put that message out there. This game isn't as big as what people are saying, but it is really huge. It's a tone setter. It's a measuring stick for where Georgia is, healthy or not, overall as a program. And it's the most anticipated game of the year for a reason. This is not a playoff elimination game, but it is technically, it's a resume setter for the playoff. You win this game, you already have that feather in your cap to show this playoff committee that, you won a top 5 game. And that's one of those rare victories that, few programs get that kind of game during the regular season to be able to show them, hey, we basically just won what amounts to a playoff game in week 1. So there's a lot of value in the game. It doesn't eliminate them. It just, again, the margin of error becomes 0 at that point.
I liken it a little bit to that Notre Dame game in the way that it has a chance to be a jumping off point. Georgia did go on to lose a game. I don't think there's an Auburn waiting on this schedule, not like that Auburn team waiting on this schedule for Georgia. But I do think that this can be a jumping off point. And not only that, if you look at what happened after that Notre Dame game that year, Georgia went on. It was a jumping off point to the point that Georgia went out there and just threw haymakers and landed every single one of them until that Auburn game. They beat the crap out of Mississippi State, Tennessee, Vanderbilt. It was right hook, left hook. They were knocking everybody down. And there was almost if you were a fan, it was a stress-free type of regular season until you got to that Auburn game. And then you kind of ran into a little bit of a buzzsaw there. Shout out to Cole Kubelik on Twitter, pointed out the last time Georgia lost a season opener, 2013 at Clemson. The last time Clemson lost a season opener, 2014 at Georgia. This one's going to be at a neutral site. Something's got to give. Let's take a break here real quick. On the other side, we'll talk about Georgia's newest commitment and let Rusty and Kip, like I like to say, wax poetic a little bit about recruiting. That's a big old boy. Georgia got Jacob Hood, 6'8", 342 pounds. Big time priority for Georgia in this class. Second offensive line pledge. Georgia moves up from number 5 to number 3 in the 24/7 composite recruiting rankings. All right. And they're number 1 in the SEC now. And they've got 5 fewer commitments than the number 2 team, Notre Dame. And I think 8 less than the number 1 team, which is Penn State. Rusty, what do you know about Jacob Hood? What do you know about where he was on Georgia's board?
it is probably, other than Orlando Brown Jr., probably the biggest offensive line prospect I've ever covered in person. Saw him up in Nashville earlier this summer. Was up there, had a chance to watch him work out. And when I mean work out, you take a 6'8", 355-pound guy, and he was boxing, and it was crisp in that gym. Let me just say that. But he's not boxing to go out and try to fight, one of these big guys. He's boxing to create some mobility, to create some different strength in his body, flexibility with his feet, those types of things. But when you see him, I mean, and we've all been in this business now for over 10 plus years, and size really don't just kind of freak you out anymore. You've seen big people, but man, it's been a long time since I've seen somebody this big. I mean, this guy is legit 6'8". And I think he became much more of a priority after his official visit to Georgia. I think Georgia kind of, again, they didn't get a chance to meet these kids face to face, but he comes up and they get a chance to meet him for a weekend, spend some time around him, and find out what type of person he is, and where he was and who he is and how big he was. I'm pretty sure it was the longest arm reach they've ever measured on an official visit, or anybody's ever come to Georgia under this staff for sure. So I don't know the exact measurement, but he was telling me that he had the longest wingspan, longest arm they've ever measured. So you take those traits on a guy, and obviously you're excited about that. I know Miami really was trying to get him as well. But, credit to Matt Luke, credit to David Cooper, a guy that you see Jacob Hood tagging him on Twitter as well. And, the new hire, former Florida recruiting assistant, who Georgia kind of filled that Nick Williams role with David Cooper. He comes in late, early in the summer. So he's already, helping land prospects. But when you look at somebody that big, and there probably can only be one or two, maybe three guys like that nationwide in a class like this. So when you go out and you land a big 6'8", 350-pound guy, it's a plus. You got that to work with. I do think that he's raw, but listen, you start with that mold, and what you've got is an elite body of his frame and size and length. So, is he a kid that starts next year? Probably not. But where's he at 2 or 3 years down the road? I mean, Isaiah Wilson, regardless of what happened in the pros, Isaiah Wilson, we all know that he needed a redshirt year. He all needed a redshirt year. After 2 more years, he was a first-round draft pick. Now, what's going on now with him is another whole conversation, but we're talking about finished product coming out of University of Georgia. He came to Georgia, 6'7", 380 pounds, and he left 340, 335 and a first-round draft pick. So, you look at a guy like that, and can Georgia mold Jacob Hood into that type of player? That's certainly the goal, and that's certainly what they're trying to do.
Absolutely. And Orlando Brown I'm really glad you brought him up without me having to do it, because what I'm going to say here is a credit to Orlando Brown. All right. It's not going to sound like that to begin with, but follow me here. I watched that kid in high school. I would have lost every single bet that anybody wanted to place. I would have lost my house, my land, my money, my livelihood, betting that he wouldn't be a good college football player.
No.
And let me tell you something. I would have confidently borrowed money from everybody I knew to bet you that he would never play in the NFL.
The thing on him too, Jake, not to cut you off, I'm with you 1,000%. He was kind of a buzz moving down here. Everybody's like, oh, this big kid from Maryland's coming. His dad's. We all see him and like, oh my goodness. Like, he can't even get in the 3-point stand. He was going to South Carolina State the morning of signing day. He was going to South Carolina. So Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, everybody passed on him. Everybody. Oklahoma had some guys, they didn't win some battles, and at the last minute go, oh, we'll take a chance on this big body kid out of Atlanta. He's got some blood.
Good decision.
You know what I mean? What a roll of the dice to get him, because how important was he even on that Rose Bowl team? But Jake, you can keep on going. I just want to kind of give the backstory. That kid had a long way to go in high school.
Yeah, listen, I can't remember. I think they may have been playing Mill Creek. It may have been during that Kelsey Griffith fiasco Kelsey Griffith fiasco that I covered, but I think they played Mill Creek that night.
That I didn't cover.
The Rusty didn't get the memo on it, was not there. Me, Kip, and Kristen Ledlow from NBA TV. I think it was that night. He didn't start. He came into the game. He played a couple series, and he came off, and he was very emotional about how badly he was struggling in that game. Like he was getting beaten constantly, and not by Kelsey Griffin, you know. And I would have bet everything but he did, and it was because those raw tools were there. He was a blank canvas for a coaching staff, and they were able to make it happen. And Kip and I were actually talking about it earlier. And Kip, we started going down the list of guys of comparable size that we've ever kind of covered, and it's not a very long list, is it?
No. I mean, I went down that rabbit hole of guys I covered over 16 years of recruiting that had, you know, maybe not greater size, but a comparable size. And it was like three guys. You know, it was Bobby Massey, Trenton Brown, Orlando Brown. And that was basically it. And honestly, I think Orlando grew an inch or two in college. I think he was, you know, pushing 6'6" at the time, you know, at Peach Ridge's legit size. And as you said, you know, he got benched. I mean, a guy that got benched, you know, for his own high school is not a guy that you think is going to make it at the next level, but you never know how they're going to react to getting that kind of coaching and getting that kind of motivation and just someone taking a chance on them. And that's where the evals really, I mean, they're really important. Like we find guys with size, but it's tough to evaluate how these linemen are handling being that big. You know, they haven't grown into their body yet, and they don't know how to use that size advantage. Sometimes with defensive linemen, it's tough because you see them just manhandling guys that are smaller than them. Well, for offensive linemen, the size difference can hurt you in high school. You know, it's tough to eval a guy who loses because he's bigger than everybody else. I mean, the guys are, you know, much quicker than him, even though they're smaller. And if you can't get your hands on them, you know, you're going to whiff a lot at that level. And sometimes, you know, at the next level, the light comes on. And definitely Orlando was a guy, the light definitely came on for him, and they won a big eval. And I mean, if any school can take a guy that's maybe a little too big for his own good right now, it's Georgia, because the trend for a long time has been finding guys that are basically tight end size and, you know, helping them get stronger and add good weight and then grow into being an offensive tackle or guard. Well, Georgia has taken several guys, like you mentioned, Rusty, Isaiah Wilson, but also, I mean, guys like Jamari Sawyer, Trey Hill, they've taken guys that are over 340 pounds coming out of high school.
Andrew Thomas.
Yeah, Andrew Thomas. They've showed up on campus bigger than what they needed to play at, and they've worked with them and helped them get into playing shape and adapt and adjust. And another thing that's going to help, I mean, that Georgia humidity, you know, that'll shed 5-10 pounds, 2 or 3 practices. You know, he'll be 328 pounds, you know, on the second day of practice out there. So, you know, this is a guy that we know that Matt Luke, you know, he identified and made him a priority. And in a class like this where Georgia's only taken maybe 3 guys, here we are, you know, the season hasn't started, and Georgia's got two guys on board, you know, that they had on campus that they worked out on the offensive line. So I think, you know, Jacob Hood fits what they're looking for. It's a good addition to this offensive line group. And now, I mean, Matt Luke can pin his ears back and go, you know, toward one more guy. If that's Ernest Green out of St. John Bosco, maybe that's the guy that's going to be coming, you know, on campus for an official visit next month. Bat on a school like Ohio State for an offensive lineman that's a top 100 prospect. It's just one of those position groups where a month or two ago, everyone was saying, is Georgia going to be able to find any offensive linemen? And we said, well, this O-line class is different across the board nationwide. Not a strong group at the top. Georgia got guys on campus, worked them out, set their board, has 2 guys on board they feel good about now. And I think that down the road, maybe 3 years, we'll be talking about this group helping them out a lot on the offensive line, because they've built depth on the offensive line. They don't need either of these 2 guys. They shouldn't need them to come in and start next year. You give them 2, maybe even 3 years in a program, And you're looking at guys who have that developmental upside to really, really turn out to be good players. They're guys worth rolling the dice on, and they're guys that, again, have a lot of things that you can't coach. I mean, that wingspan, that's something that, I mean, that's what got him the first look. And now he's showing you, if you look at the commitment article that Steve Wilfong has on Dogs 24/7, the guy's working hard on his own. He's got the drive to make himself the best offensive tackle he could possibly be. And if that, bears fruit, if he continues that same mindset, then yeah, I mean, that checks all the boxes you want in offensive line prospects. So I think it's a big get for Matt Luke. And I think Georgia's class continuing to take shape, 16 commitments, heading into September, with a lot of guys that could be trending their way, if everything holds right and their visits go well. This overall group of commitments is starting to look a lot better once again than what it looked like a couple months ago.
And I'll say this too. This is a kid that's 30-something spots out of 4-star range. He's right there kind of on that cusp between 3 and 4-star. Could be a top 247 kid before everything's said and done. We don't know. But Rusty, something I want to pose to you. How many offensive linemen, and listen, this isn't to say, oh man, this is a great eval, Jacob Hood's going to be a superstar. I'm not saying, I don't know. I mean, again, I just told you about how ignorant I was with Orlando Brown and how bad I missed that one. Okay. And by the way, Rusty, you talk about the first big one you see. Trenton Brown was the biggest one I've ever seen.
Yeah,
I showed up at Georgia Military one time, and it looked like a dinosaur walking amongst humans that day. I've never seen a human being.
I saw Trenton Brown come out full uniform with the dress shoes and all, and I'm telling you, those 2 shoes look like canoes. I mean, those things.
Canoe shoe Brown.
I mean, you could have sat in one of those things and float a river on a Sunday. But that Trenton Brown, Orlando, and Tunsil was 6'6.5" as far as a big guy, but yeah, I think you are spot on with Trenton Brown. That's where it is. But I think kind of the raw Jacob Hood is way ahead of Orlando Brown, way ahead.
Yeah.
Orlando. I mean, I never thought.
But how many? Let me ask you this: How many guys? And I'm not going to call out any names, but I've got a few in mind, and you can probably remember. How many 6'2", 6'3", 280-pound stone cold killers, high school offensive linemen have you seen? And you're just like, man, that dude is a football player. He's a dude. He goes to college, he gets lost. It happens all the time. It happens so often.
To me, offensive line is the hardest to evaluate because you don't know how they're going to react when everybody is as big or bigger. You know what I mean? Because in high school, they're the dominant guy. 9 times out of 10, if a guy's getting recruited to Georgia, Florida, Alabama, they are the most dominant lineman, in the game. I mean, I specifically remember going to see Dylan Fairchild last year, and you guys know I'm sky high on him, but I mean, Dylan Fairchild was throwing kids around. And when I mean literally throwing kids around, he was throwing kids around. I mean, here's a 6'5", 300-pound state heavyweight wrestling champ, and 70-0. So he was strong and all, but I never saw Dylan Fairchild go against anybody the same size, quickness that he's seeing right now in Athens. I guarantee if we talked to Dylan Fairchild, if we were able to get him on here, I bet you Dylan Fairchild would tell us, oh my gosh, this is a whole new world. And that's what every freshman in the country is going through right now. So we're not picking on him, but getting back to your point, the evaluation part to me is so hard to do offensive line. But I know this, when that guy walks in, Jacob Hood walks into the Buttsmere, he's going to be the biggest guy in the room. So that's a great place to start. And when you start talking about you're the biggest guy in the room at the University of Georgia, that's saying a lot in the offensive line room.
Yeah, and this goes back to the Orlando Brown thing. It's something I said to Kip earlier. He went to college. He got punched in the nose. He got his nose bloodied, and he responded like a man. And I don't mean to sound misogynist when I say that, but he knuckled up and got ready to play football. And that's something you don't know. You can try to know. You can do everything you can. You can ask the janitor and the kid that kicked his butt growing up and his big brother and everything else, but you don't really know how they're going to handle that till they get to college. And what you can do is you can recruit the guys with the raw tools. Like Kip said, you can recruit the ones that have the stuff you can't teach, and try to make sure you're getting the ones that are going to get their nose bloodied and respond the right way. And then you've got a player. But it takes all of that.
We can get into Jake. We can get into stuff that nobody wants to hear about, the knee bender, waist bender. We can get into all that stuff. But I'll throw one more name at you too. And it goes back to, let's just be honest, goes back to a Sam Pittman evaluation. You look at Solomon Kinley, who was 6'5", 380 pounds. At Solomon Kinley, he didn't make a blip on our board. I remember when he wound up starting in front of some big-time targets, everybody's like, what are we doing playing this guy? And, 2 years later, he's a third, fourth round pick for the Dolphins. He starts as a rookie. He changed his body. But, that eval stuff for offensive line.
Solomon Kinley, I saw Solomon Kinley for the first time at a Georgia basketball game. He was every bit as big as that hairy dog, blow-up dog thing that goes upside down, right side up, whatever. He was just as wide as that thing.
We ran that picture for about 2 years until we finally got him sitting in the bleachers with, making Sam Pittman look tiny for a long time. But, these body types, I think people get too much. Listen, these let's just say the Tyler Booker from IMG, this class. Tyler Booker, unless something really, really changes, is going to be a Sunday football player. Georgia didn't get him, but those types of evals, we all can do. We all can walk in and look at Laramie Tunsil and go, I've never seen a human being that could bend like that, ever. I still have never seen a human being that could bend like Laramie Tunsil. Tyler Booker, incredible football player, some of the stuff I've seen on him. But it's these evals like these guys, Jacob Hood. Can you turn this guy who has elite measurement and size into a really good college football player? So that's what, in the recruiting world, we have to kind of evaluate our guys that are doing this. Steve Wilfong, Andrew Ivins, Greg Biggins, Brandon Huffman, all those guys that make those last calls. Somebody has to make that judgment and go, hey, this guy's not stiff in the hips. He can be better, this and that. But for me specifically, looking at that, it's a no-brainer for Georgia. It's a no-brainer in this class to add a human being of this size. What I know of him, just meeting him that one time, very polite young man. And for me to see him boxing after a morning workout, he had football practice in the morning, and then he came and worked out at his gym in the afternoon, and it was warm. Now, I'm telling you, this is summertime in Nashville, and it was smoking hot that day. So it tells me a lot about kind of what he is and what he's made up of on the inside.
Guys, let's let these people go. Let's quit occupying all these people's times. That's all we got for this episode of Junkyard Dawgcast. But before we go, I want to give a shout out. I've been told that we've got a 17-year-old listener, Jade Stevens, loyal listener. I want to give her a shout out. I hope she's listening. Her dad told me that they listen to it all the time, listen to the podcast. Cool girl, know her a little bit. She's awesome. And
let's get her on.
We should get her on. She probably knows more about Georgia football than both of us.
Let's get her on.
But I hope she's having a great day. I hope she's listening to the show. But for this episode of Junkyard Dawgcast, I'll get her out in a minute. Junkyard Dawgcast, that's all we've got. I'm Jake Rowe with Dogs 24/7. They're Rusty Mansell and Kip Adams from the same place. And you all take it easy.